right. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Kate Nielsen. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy Research and Legal Advocacy at AAUW. My pronouns are she, her. I'm excited that you all have joined us today to talk about this really important topic on the political and nonpartisan nature of AAUW. I'm joined today by members of our APPC, which is our Public Policy Committee. I'm also joined by our Grassroots Advocacy Manager. This is the first in a series of webinars about kind of sticky issues at AAUW that we think it's worth having a discussion about and sharing some more information about. And I want to give a big thank you to our APPC for leading this series. The Public Policy Committee is comprised of somewhere in the range of 10 to 12 members who are volunteer. They apply to be a part of the committee, and they help guide our public policy and work closely with myself and the rest of the policy staff to guide our priorities and help engage on some really important work. And every 2 years, they lead the process of refining our public policy priorities. So today I'm joined by our chair, Barbara Price, and another member, Becky Ball, who will do the majority of the speaking about our history and what it means for AAUW policy. I'll then turn it over to my colleague, Robin Lucas, our Grassroots Advocacy Manager, who will talk about you and your role and how you can engage in this important process. And with that, I think that I will turn it over to our chair, Barbara Price, to get us started.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm really glad that we're doing this series, and as Kate talked, they are issues that keep coming up for staff, and we'll be looking at a number of them. So AAUW is nonpartisan, but has always been political. In fact, in 1881, when AAUW was founded, encouraging higher education for women was quite a radical idea. And in fact, our first research in 1883 pushed back on the idea that it was not a problem to have higher education. And it refuted a claim by a Boston physician that higher education would be harmful to women's health, specifically their reproductive health. So how are we political? Well, basically we endorse legislation at the federal level, such as the Build Back Better Act. We take political stands dictated by our member adopted public policy priorities. We influence legislative debate by educating our members on issues through the Policy Center on the AAUW website, through Washington Week in Review that goes to every member, writing letters and op-eds, offering testimony and comments, and lobbying and other grassroots efforts to push forward policies that break through educational and economic barriers for women. We work with any policymaker. We really can't assume that everyone from a particular party will support or not support our issues. AAUW's congressional voting record indicates how often representatives and senators support legislation that is a focus of AAUW's public policy priorities. The voting record is really a wonderful guide to use in thanking your legislators when they support our policy issues, and also for asking them why they don't support an issue. Now, Becky will offer a deeper look at AAUW's political history.
Good afternoon. I'm Becky Ball from the Falls Church, Virginia branch, and I became a member of the Public Policy Committee just last fall. So I'm happy to help with this presentation to help everyone, to remind everybody on how AAUW has always been political, although we have also always been nonpartisan. So I'm sure many of you know lots of interesting things about AAUW's long history, but I wanted to take this opportunity to point out some of the especially interesting political advocacy bits from our history. So I'm just going to skim through a few of these, but as Barbara said, from the very beginning, AAUW has been a catalyst for the advancement of women and helping to influence opinion and propel new laws. Early on, very early on in 1898, our predecessor organization, the Association of College Alumni, created its first legislative committee to work on educational legislation. And by the early 1900s, the ACA was advocating for child labor laws, compulsory public education, funding for libraries, and the creation of juvenile courts. And in 1913, the Washington, D.C. branch began our pay equity efforts with the creation of a report on U.S. civil service jobs, job classifications, and compensation. And in creating that report, the branch found that women were paid 78% versus men in similar roles. So I'm sure that's a familiar sounding statistic. Then in 1935, AAUW supported legalizing physicians' dispensation of contraceptive information. And moving along to our 50th anniversary in the World War II era, AAUW member, Representative Chase Woodhouse from Connecticut, introduced the first federal legislative proposal for pay equity. And that, as you know, we're still also working on legislation on that issue. So moving along into the 1960s, AAUW members were increasingly engaged in the civil rights movement and helped work to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. Then by 1970, AAUW issued a report, as we are still doing research and publishing reports, but this one in 1970 was groundbreaking. It was called Campus 1970, Where Do Women Stand? And it documented sex discrimination against women in higher education and spurred AAUW's distribution of affirmative action guidelines to colleges and universities. By the 1970s, AAUW was instrumental in passage of Title IX, which was introduced by AAUW member Edith Green from Oregon, and also co-anchored by AAUW member Patsy Mink, representative from Hawaii. And AAUW has continued through up until the present day, tracking the progress, setbacks, and helping to defend and strengthen Title IX. By 1975, then in 1975, AAUW created the Capitol Hill Lobby Corps, which I have been a member of for almost 10 years. And it is volunteers from the DC Metro, Washington, DC metro area branches, basically close in Maryland, Northern Virginia, and DC branches, who volunteer as to lobby on Capitol Hill almost every week when Congress is in session, until we were forced by COVID to go on hiatus. But as part of that Lobby Corps activity, we've become familiar faces in many Capitol Hill offices. And we're especially known because we are unpaid volunteers, as opposed to the many highly paid lobbyists that come up for many other issues to lobby Congress. We're known for being prepared, polite, and very persistent, since we work for a long time on many of these issues. So anyway, so going on into the 80s, we were instrumental in passage of the Civil Rights Restoration Act and a lot of proposals for higher education amendments. And in 1993, we advocated for passage of the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, which continues to be in the news because it allowed for unpaid leave for qualified medical and family issues. In the 90s, again, we helped advocate for passage of the Violence Against Women Act, which was the first comprehensive federal legislation designed to end violence against women. And then working on up into more recent times, by 2009, AAUW staff especially and members provided critical support, which resulted in President Obama signing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to state a very important point that limitations for filing equal pay lawsuits reset with each new affected paycheck. So that's the support that our public policy staff, Kate's predecessors in her job, was critical in that getting to President Obama's desk in 2009. And there were AAUW members present at that signing. And then working our way on up to more recent times, AAUW has been working with the administration to enact critical pay equity executive orders. We've helped to update pay laws in many states as well as at the federal level. And AAUW members and staff continue to advocate for the Paycheck Fairness Act, which did pass with bipartisan support in the House and in 2019. And you notice that many of these issues are things that we are still lobbying on, that you're still getting your 2-minute activist nudges on. And so just to conclude the section about history, you can see how far we've come, but you can see that we've got a long ways to go on many, many very familiar issues. But a lot of these are especially in the public consciousness right now. So I think there's lots and lots of opportunities for AAUW to continue to have dramatic impact in its members' advocacy. So I'm going to turn that back over to Barbara to help remind us how AAUW's public policies are actually created.
So AAUW's public policy priorities underscore AAUW's mission to advance gender equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. They are our guidelines for our public policy work. They focus and prioritize our advocacy efforts because in reality, we can't respond to everything that is happening. They also help our national staff as to the public policy issues that are important to our members. AAUW's work builds upon responsible public participation, and the priorities provide a basis for AAUW members' actions at the local and state level. So where do we get the public policy priorities? Basically, these begin with whatever the current public policy priorities are. Let's go back to okay. And the Association Public Policy Committee works with staff to review whatever the current public policy priorities are. They come up every 2 years. We'll be beginning that process again next summer because the current ones run through the end of next year. At that point, we come up with a draft if there's anything that we want to add, and that draft goes out to members for comments. And there's a long period of time where members can comment, they can send their suggestions in. They can make suggestions on changes. At that point, when the comment period ends, they all come back to the Association Public Policy Committee and staff, and we review all the comments that were sent in and make adjustments based on what members have submitted. It then goes to the Board of Directors for their review, and then it goes out again to the membership to vote on and approve during our election process. So basically, we don't do anything at the national level that hasn't come from the bottom up. So our current priority positions, basically they match our strategic plan. So they address issues affecting education, economic security, and equality and individual rights. So, and that means working on legislation and with the current administration to suggest changes in policy. For instance, under education, AAUW is working to restore, strengthen, and encourage vigorous enforcement of Title IX, and also to address the student loan debt crisis, which disproportionately impacts borrowers of color. Our efforts under economic security include achieving pay equity by passing the Paycheck Fairness Act. Also keeping paid leave in the Build Back Better legislation and supporting inclusive childcare and universal pre-K provisions in the Build Back Better legislation. Under equality, individual rights, and social justice, AAUW supports the Equality Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and other legislation to protect voting rights. In many cases, we will work with coalition partners at the national level. Because our public policy priorities are broad and expansive, we have the ability to regroup when needed to address issues as they arise. A good example of this are the current attacks on abortion rights. Self-determination of one's reproductive health decisions is an AAUW public policy priority, but has only recently emerged as a major issue again. AAUW is addressing that by joining with the Women's Law Project amicus briefs on Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is the Mississippi case before the Supreme Court. Our public policy priorities can also offer guidance for the AAUW's work at the state level. States do not have to advocate on all of the issues in the public policy priorities. For instance, some states have been able to pass wonderful legislation on pay equity, and others have not. States can take up issues that may be important to their state, but are not an AAUW priority at the national level, at the federal level. The only caution is that members may not advocate on behalf of their branch or state on an issue that is in conflict with AAUW's public policy priorities. Members are welcome to advocate as an individual for an issue, but just not in the name of AAUW. Now I'm going to turn things over to Robin Lucas, AAUW's Grassroots Advocacy Manager, who will explain what members can do to advance AAUW issues.
Thank you, Barbara and Becky, for that great review. And hello, everyone. My name is Robin. My pronouns are she, her. And as Barbara said, I'm the Grassroots Advocacy Manager at AAUW and the AAUW Action Fund. The next step in AAUW's advocacy activities, and the most crucial piece to making an impact, is mobilizing advocates like yourselves. So let's talk about how to engage in public policy as an individual. First, we're going to talk about 3 key hubs of activity in AAUW, and then we'll talk about my 3 favorite ways to engage. First, I'm going to drop in the chat The first hub of activity would be the AAUW 2-minute activist tool. The 2-minute activist tool is your first stop when looking to find what AAUW is actively engaged in. Each 2-minute activist action page is either a piece of legislation or a major policy issue that includes vital details to keep you informed and concrete steps on how to contact relevant elected officials. The second hub is an advocacy toolkit page, also dropping this in the chat. So, oh, that's the same one. Apologies, everyone. An example of an issue-specific advocacy toolkit page. Hold on. There we go. So the first piece there is the Greater AAUW Advocacy Toolkit page that is found on our website and includes a lot of how-to guides, say how to meet with an elected official, or given that we're coming up on another election year, how to organize a candidate forum, also how to write a letter to the editor, and how to report back on if you did host an advocacy activity to let us know how the event went, and a lot of really key organizing information. The second link that I just included is a specific toolkit page for a specific topic. And this refers more to advocacy toolkits for like a specific topic and how to engage in each of them. For key issues requiring a larger focus, over the past year and a half, we've developed a more comprehensive advocacy toolkit when it comes to something vital to AAUW's mission, for example, the Paycheck Fairness Act, or an issue we know will be a long and complicated campaign. In the example that I included is the pandemic crisis relief process. So we provide a central advocacy toolkit page that can serve as a one-stop location on that topic for all updates and engagement opportunities, including talking points if you're going to engage with an elected official or write a letter to the editor, and any legislation that has passed or is being considered in that area. And then our third hub of activity has already been discussed a little bit, but I'm going to copy and paste it into the chat just one more time for everyone. But that would be Lobby Corps. So direct lobbying efforts, both by AAUW's Lobby Corps and also our state public policy chairs, maintain consistent contact with elected officials on the federal and local levels, advocating on behalf of all AAUW members and the public policy priorities. So at AAUW, we know that advocacy and lobbying can take many forms. We provide a variety of engagement opportunities because we know that everyone brings different skill sets to the table and different strengths to their advocacy work as individuals. We all have a part to play. So with that said, the second list here are 3 different specific activities that you can engage in depending on your interest and skill set and what you are looking to engage in. The first one, writing a letter to the editor, is a great way to inform your local community and also generate pressure around an issue. So I do recommend, if you want to kind of stir up and collect power around an issue, starting with a letter to the editor to engage community members can be really valuable. The second option is calling and meeting with your elected officials. We all know this is incredibly important. And remember, they work for you and they need to hear from you, particularly if they aren't on the record supporting a gender equity issue, but also if they do have a positive record on one of our issue areas, they need to know that they're doing a great job and hear about your support. And finally, the activity that sometimes gets the least attention, talking to your friends and loved ones. While talking to elected officials may seem like the most important, and it absolutely is important, doing the hard work of educating your fellow community members and voters is absolutely critical. So use the information on our 2-minute activist pages, read the AAUW quick facts page, pages on a specific issue, and walk through them with the people that you know. Have the hard conversations around a difficult topic and see how many people you can find common ground with to move more people into our great number of supporters. So many of the issue areas we focus on are inundated with misinformation and at times political technicalities. So it's important for voters to stay informed from trusted nonpartisan sources like AAUW. And that brings us to a vital piece of AAUW practice, the do's and don'ts of nonpartisan advocacy. We are all individual people with our own specific beliefs and affiliations, and each of you can participate in the political arena however you please as private individuals. However, the moment that AAUW hat gets put on, whether attending an AAUW event or meeting with an elected official as an AAUW member, or even writing AAUW member since in your letter to the editor, you must honor these guidelines. So on the left side here, we have the do's: remain nonpartisan, work on issues guided by our values and mission. The third one, engage with candidates and elected officials from all major parties equally. And finally, encourage voter registration for everyone, regardless of their political persuasion. And then on the right, our don'ts are: first, do not expressly advocate for or endorse any partisan candidate. Don't encourage voter registration for a particular party or discourage for a particular party. Do not share AAUW member lists with campaigns or political parties. And don't raise funds for partisan candidates or coordinate any election activity with a campaign or political party. And finally, do not support anything in conflict with AAUW's public policy priorities. So these two short lists are critical in engaging as an AAUW advocate. We are a nonpartisan community, and the policy issues we work so hard to advance have nothing to do with political parties in this country. Our mission is to advance gender equity for all women and people of all parties and affiliations. And if you ever have any questions on where an activity or wording and phrasing falls in this do's and don'ts, please contact either your state or branch AAUW, or you can email us at advocacy@aauw.org. Thank you. And I'm going to bring it back around to Kate, Barbara, Becky, and myself for questions and Q&A section.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate that overview. And we've had some great questions that I'd love to direct to some of you. Robin, I'm going to direct this first one to you. I know it's one that you love. And I think it's really a useful and illustrative question. This comes from a member who says, our local newspaper editor claims that equity is different from equality. Can you please define and explain these two terms?
Absolutely. This really goes to the root of what these words mean, is where people are coming from. Equality means that every person in a group are coming from the same perspective, have the same resources, have the same experiences. While equity is recognizing how different people come from different circumstances, and the framework of equity, it requires us to speak specifically to people on where they're coming from and make certain allocations depending on their circumstances and different experiences. So my favorite is, I'm a very visual learner, and it's kind of looking at people of different heights trying to look over a fence. And, I'm a tall person, so I can easily see through a crowd, but a friend of mine who is not tall can't. So equality is we're all at the same concert. We're all at the same baseball game, but equity means giving someone a box to stand on so they can see the concert or the baseball game the same way I do. Also, I can drop a link in the chat. We do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion toolkit on the AAUW website that does speak to the definitions and concepts and frameworks around equity a little bit more.
Thanks very much, Robin. Really appreciate that. Also, just want to have a plug and mention that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website under member resources. And feel free to access it. It will take a few days. It won't be available immediately, but happy to provide it. So folks can refer back and use this to guide their advocacy. You're also looking at a page right now that has several important resources, many of which Robin dropped into the chat. As a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A and we'll try and get to it. And Robin, I just want you to talk just a minute more about when and how members should advocate on our issues, on federal and state things, when it's okay to put your name on it, when we shouldn't, and the guidelines around that.
Absolutely. Is there a little bit more on the question there? I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about whether a branch can directly advocate on either a federal or state priority on an AAUW priority issue. So yeah.
Absolutely. So first, if you're speaking as a branch, I would recommend that you talk to your state AAUW first. That's assuming that you have a state AAUW. I know that some branches operate without a state, umbrella. But please first, if you do have a state AAUW, speak to them first and check in with what their activities are. That said, if you're looking at a federal issue, please go to the 2-Minute Activist page that I linked earlier, because that is a list of all legislation and issues that we are on record and advocating for actively. If it's something like you want to make a state or local specific action, activity, or letter to the editor around Paycheck Fairness Act, for example, but you want to make it specific to your state, your town, and really engage your members on it to a local focus, that is absolutely all right. Go and use all of the information that we've listed around Paycheck Fairness Act. And if there are any questions, reach out to advocacy@aauw.org to ask me for advice or thoughts. If it's something that we're not on the record for, you can absolutely send the question into us as well. But that is not something that you can take a stance on before we do. So for federal issues, AAUW National has to take a stance first, and then you're able to engage. So check in with us on federal issues first. And then on state, you can absolutely reach out to your state AAUW to see where they fall on a state issue. And Kate and myself do have a process of vetting bills on a state level. So if there's a piece of legislation you'd like to engage on, and you know that your state hasn't taken a position on it yet, because legislation's always evolving, that is really exciting, please reach out to us and we are happy to vet it and talk with you.
Thanks, Robin. I'm going to let you rest for a second and rattle off a few answers live on questions that have come into the Q&A. One is just building upon this. Do the restrictions on policy advocacy apply only when we are advocating as an AAUW member? Yes. You can feel free to be an advocate on any issue or any partisan candidate that you want, as long as it's not under the auspices of AAUW, an AAUW branch, or an AAUW state. We certainly are not in a position to tell you who to advocate for and what issues to work on, but you cannot go outside of our public policy priorities while wearing an AAUW hat. I see a question about having a member of Lobby Corps or the public policy team speak at a branch meeting. We receive these frequently and we're happy to try and honor them when possible. There is a request form available online. Robin, maybe you'd be able to drop that into the chat, please. And you can fill that out to request a speaker. Please bear in mind that we get requests from all 50 states and members, so unfortunately we're not able to honor everyone, but we certainly try. We're more likely to be able to join if it is a larger activity with larger reach. So keep that in mind when planning, but we will do our very best to accommodate the request. I see a question about working on women veterans issues. This is something that is a lower priority for us, but is certainly within our priorities. We work on it as issues bubble up and we have capacity to do so. See a question about redistricting. And this is definitely something that we encourage states to get involved with. Voting rights and the ability to express your opinion at the ballot box is absolutely critical. So we definitely encourage you to be active and engaged in that. We do not have the specific expertise at the national level to be able to weigh in on lines and where they're drawn. So this is definitely something that we encourage you to work on in coalition, but we strongly encourage you to do that work. Robin, we've had a few questions about Action Network emails. Can you talk a little bit about our cadence on when we send them and how we choose to send them, and the sort of the thought process behind that?
Absolutely. So the Action Network emails that Kate is referring to are the emails that come as a part of being a 2-minute activist. So the link that I sent out, if you're not signed up for these alerts right now, you can go sign up to be a 2-minute activist. And that is signing up to receive these emails that we send out about specific legislation issues that we're engaged on, when it is impactful and pertinent and time specific on please engage now. This is kind of our more rapid mobilization tactic to engage with advocates like yourselves and make sure that you are having a greater impact. So if we know that a bill vote is coming up in the Senate or the House, or sometimes on a state level in your state legislature, we will send out an email with information around it. So it's all, for the most part, time sensitive or really, really critical advocacy actions that we're asking you to take part in.
Thanks, Robin. I see a question about the congressional voting record. This is a resource that we put out with each new Congress. So every 2 years, it is available on the Action Fund website. Robin, if you don't mind dropping that into the chat, that would be lovely. Question about speaking at school board meetings on appropriate issues like Title IX. Absolutely. Feel free to use any of the resources that we have, whether that be quick facts about Title IX generally, whether that be our research reports, or other letters or testimony that we have authored and are available on the News and Insights link that can help inform your testimony. Some questions coming in about work with school boards and attacks on school boards, and critical race theory and things like that. We have joined a statement about critical race theory and the attacks on it. This is something that I think it's really important to make sure that we're supporting school boards and we're supporting teachers, but also to not get bogged down in a red herring discussion. Critical race theory isn't taught in schools for the most part. This is a something that's been conflated and turned into an issue as a talking point. So while we think it's important to lend our support to the concepts, we don't think that it's worth giving airtime to an issue that is just fodder and a distraction. Look through the questions.
I see a good question. Is AAUW allowed to have an event with candidates of both political parties? And then can we ask candidates about their support for AAUW priorities? Absolutely. That is exactly something that AAUW branches and state AAUWs do engage in. It's called hosting a candidate forum. We have a how-to guide on the website, and I will pull up a link to it. But it is in the advocacy toolkit page that I already sent out. And when when branches and states do host a candidate forum during an election year, it is with both parties, all parties in that race invited. And that absolutely is a great way for voters to be able to engage and inquire of different candidate stances on really important gender equity issues that we advocate for. Thank you for asking the question.
I see another question about abortion and what stance we're taking on it, in addition to a brief, the amicus brief that we signed on to in support of Dobbs Jackson. We work, our primary goal right now is passing the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify really important reproductive rights via Congress as opposed to the courts. So that's the major vehicle we're working on right now. We will continue to engage as more topics become timely, more engagement opportunities arise. As I'm sure many folks know, AAUW is a pro-choice organization, and reproductive health and rights are near and dear to our hearts. We don't believe that we can have out those rights. That being said, there are many strong partners that we work with who lead on this. And we work closely with them to make sure we're lifting up the good work that they're doing.
And I have dropped the action page link to the Women's Health Protection Act in the chat.
And let's see, Robin, did you see the question about if a candidate from a political party declines and how to handle that situation?
Try and make it as accommodating as possible so that candidates from as many parties as possible or anyone in that race is going to attend and communicate it that way publicly. And sometimes people aren't able to attend for various reasons. So you do the best you can.
I see another question wondering about how useful it is to send 2-minute activist letters, whether having a certain number matters, how that matters to AAUW and how that matters to the elected officials who are receiving them.
Yeah, it's really important for elected officials to hear from us, as we've talked about, and as everyone knows. What is really incredibly important and a factor of the 2-minute activist tool that we have, it is all specific to who your elected official is. It asks for your address and location so that you can be targeted on the correct elected officials. Because one of the most important and valuable things as an advocate is to say, I am your constituent, you are my elected official, you work for me. And every single person who responds to one of our action alerts to contact their elected official and communicate it to them are a part of that. And it's really important for them to hear from as many people as possible. But I don't think that there's a quantifiable minimum number of people. I think that every time someone engages is incredibly valuable, and know that you can engage as many times as you want. It's not a one and done, I sent my letter and I'm not allowed to do it again. You can email them every day. An aunt of mine calls an elected official literally every day right now about paid leave. And that is incredibly important. They're just checking in every day on, hey, how are you doing your job? So as few times as you are able to, up to as many times as you're able to, is incredibly valuable. Just make sure to say, I am your constituent if you're calling on the phone.
I want to ask both Becky and Barbara to rejoin the conversation here and share some of their own experiences in that vein. Becky, as a member of Lobby Corps and what you've seen as useful tactics, and Barbara as a really effective advocate in the state of Pennsylvania, and how you've been able to influence your particular representative. So I wonder if you each could say a couple words about your effective advocacy. Barbara, you want to start?
Did you say Becky or Barbara?
I said Barbara, go for it.
All right. One of the reasons I talked about thanking your elected officials is that my actual, my own personal representative in Congress is a Republican. And we have a kind of a very purple district. And he voted for the Paycheck Fairness Act because basically we met with his staff, several of us in the area, AAUW and a couple other organizations that we work with locally, and met with his staff, presented the whole reason and the AAUW report on pay equity, which specifically shows what the gap is in his district. And he likes research. I knew that. So even after we met with his staff one day, the next day I saw him at an event and handed him the research, although we had left it with his staff, and pointed out, you know, specifically his area and what the gap was. And he immediately got on the phone and called his staff and said, get the number of the bill and, you know, sign me up to co-sponsor it. And when it came up for a vote in the House, he did vote for it. But that's because I knew from talking to his staff and other people that we've worked with that he liked research, that he wanted facts that supported, you know, a position. And so giving him the AAUW research on pay equity really helped convince him that he should vote for that legislation.
Thanks, Barbara. That's one of my favorite stories of relationships. Do you want to speak a little bit to your experience as a Lobby Corps member and some of the do's and don'ts and tactics that you found to be effective?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I wanted to say that one of the greatest things about being a member of Lobby Corps is that the legislators, when we AAUW members go to Capitol Hill to represent AAUW members nationwide who can't easily walk into the offices, is that we represent their constituents, and we're just normal everyday citizen activists. We're not being paid to state opinions, and they see us as their neighbors, as their mom, as the teacher, as people in the community, rather than somebody who works for some corporate interest. So that's a very valuable position to have when talking to a legislator. And that I also wanted to mention that when we do lobby, we often don't speak to the actual representative or the senator. We usually end up speaking to their staffers. And that's also a very valuable opportunity to take, because it's often much easier to have casual, informal conversations about issues with the staffers, especially because a lot of them are young and they're interested in how a lot of our AAUW issues affect them, like the reports that we have about the differences in whatever, the report that's about how only a few years out of college, young women with the same field, the same geographic area, the same skills, are paid slightly less than young men in this, who have the same kind of degree, same kind of field. So that really hits them, is that, oh, it really does affect me. And when it affects you, when it affects the staffer personally, they're much more apt to listen to the issue and then carry AAUW's position on to their bosses, the representative or the legislator. And also that Lobby Corps does distribute a lot of the AAUW research reports and use those in our lobbying. And they are also very effective tools, especially the ones about the pay difference, the pay equity differences that staff have gone through and broken down by legislative district several times. And like I think Robin was saying, those are very, very useful to legislators when you can point something down as like this affects your district. So it's useful to talk to your legislators, and it doesn't have to be a big deal, especially once we get back into the situation where face-to-face conversations are easier in person. And again, I wanted to commend the AAUW public policy staff and all the information that they do post online. Sometimes you have to search for it a little bit to find it on the website, but there's a lot of very valuable information on AAUW's positions that you can use to inform your conversations. And the 2-minute activist is that, but also the information that you get when you get those 2-minute activist notifications help inform you about positions.
Thanks, Becky, and thanks for all that you. All right, we are getting close to the end of the hour. I'm gonna answer a couple more questions all in one bucket, and then wrap up for the afternoon. I see a question that's asking about how to meet with several different representatives at the same time. Your branch is represented by several in several different districts, and how to do that. And the short answer is do whatever you can. If you are able to meet with just one representative, that's fine. You don't have to meet with every representative of your district. If you're able to meet with multiple ones, wonderful. The more you can get FaceTime or phone time or video time, the better. To some extent, it doesn't matter what that looks like. The more the better, but there's not one right way to do it. Do what feels possible for you. Remember to say that you're a constituent. Those are the magic words. And then in line with another question about how to influence legislators, especially if it feels like they're towing a party line, not necessarily considering the nuances of an issue. Best thing you can do is say you're a constituent. You are their boss, right? You vote them into office and they need to be accountable to you. Number one. And number two, present them with as much information as you can on the topic. Use AAUW resources, use your own personal stories. Just try and lay out to them why this matters and the research that backs it up. Those are the most important things you can do. Robin, anything to add to that before we conclude?
No, thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for being here and being such a valuable part of our work. This all is on behalf of everyone who's on this call and everyone in this country. So we appreciate being in it with you and for all that you do.
And a big thank you to Becky and Barbara for all your work in getting this together, answering questions, doing research. Throughout the winter and spring, we will have additional webinars on some of our sticky issues that Barbara and others on the APPC will lead. So looking forward to those. So at the beginning, this recording will be available on our website, and we will also try and make the slides available upon request. Feel free to email advocacy@aauw.org with any questions, and we'll respond to them as we are able. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a very safe and happy holiday season. Take care.